Kia and CEO Morgan spend a passionate night alone on a mountain. Shocking proposal. Hey everyone, welcome back to another heart-touching love story. First, a special thanks to all of you for the amazing love and appreciation on my last story. It truly means the world to me. Your assistance sustains me, and your appreciation serves as my primary source of motivation. If you're logged in and ready to watch today's blockbuster love story, please leave an active comment below. Know how many of you are truly engaged in loving these stories. Now, today's the story is very special. Writing it took me at least 8 hours. Relax and enjoy the romance and passion that are just for you in deep emotions. Your hands free and get ready to feel the depth of love and romance like never before. And of course, don't forget to, if you want more heartwarming tales, subscribe to the channel now. As it soared through the air, the private jet, World of Love, made steady hums. Cutting through the clouds with effortless grace inside the lavish cabin, with his usual calm demeanor and sharp blue eyes, CEO Morgan sat, scanning the business reports in his hands. Everything about him radiated power, his chiseled jaw, the tailored suit hugging his strong frame, and the air of authority that terrified even the most experienced executives. But today he lost concentration, not because of a business deal, but rather because of the woman seated directly in front of him. Secretary Katya Monroe, she was typing diligently on her laptop. Her delicate Morgan's occasional glances went unnoticed as their fingers glided across the keys. Stole under her direction, Katya had been working for him for more than a year, demonstrating that she was more than just an effective assistant. She was also smart, graceful, and unshakable. Loyal, and yet for the first time, Morgan found himself looking at her in a way he never before had, the soft illumination of her flawless by the cabin lights. Her beautiful face was framed by her long, silky brown hair that fell over her shoulders. Her perfectly proportioned curves concealed by a tailored business outfit. She was an unquestionable vision, but her physical beauty wasn't the only thing that caught his attention. It was the quiet confidence in her posture, the warmth in her amber eyes, and the soft scent of jasmine that seemed to surround her. Something about her presence stirred something foreign, something he wasn't used to felt in him, the desire, interest, and urge to understand her. Beyond the professional walls they had built, the intercom crackled, breaking the "please pause," as a sudden storm is developing in the mountain range. It's not safe to continue the flight. The pilot's voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency beneath it. Morgan looked at his report with a frown before asking, "Can we reroute?" Was evident prior to the pilot's negative response. "Sir, the closest safe landing spot is a small airstrip near the mountains, where we will need to spend the night before the storm passes." Kata looked up, concern flickering in her eyes. "Is it dangerous?" she asked softly, her voice smooth yet laced with worry. Morgan shook his head no, just despite the fact that he himself was aware of the fact that nature was unpredictable. Within minutes, the jet began its descent, and soon they touched. The air was clear and fresh below, on the deserted runway surrounded by towering mountains covered in mist. The stark contrast between the polished city life and the earthy scent of the wilderness they were used to. A black SUV awaited them, provided by the local airstrip. Morgan and Katya entered the vehicle, and the driver, an elderly man they were given a cautious look by the rugged face as they saw the approaching storms. He warned them to take cover before dark before driving them up the winding mountain roads. But fate had other plans. The storm arrived earlier than anticipated halfway through the journey. Fierce winds howled, rain poured in violent sheets, and the visibility dropped to almost nothing at once. In a sudden loud crash, as a tree collapsed onto the road ahead, blocking their path completely, the driver cursed under his breath. "Damn it, we can't go forward, and turning back is impossible with this storm." Morgan clenched his jaw, thinking fast. "Is there a shelter nearby?" The driver nodded, indicating that there is an old ranger's cabin not far from here. "It's abandoned, but it'll keep you safe until morning." Without hesitation, Morgan took charge. "Take us there." Within minutes, they arrived at him. The wind was howling outside the small wooden cabin in the thick woods as the storm raged. Howling like a beast, shaking the very foundation of the structure, The driver left them with a lantern and some emergency supplies before heading back to the airstrip, leaving Morgan and Kaya. The cabin was all by itself, just one big room with a fireplace made of old wood, a bed, and a small kitchenette. It was far from luxury, but it was warm and dry. Kata shivered, rubbing her arms. "Looks like we're stuck here for the night," she murmured, glancing out the window as lightning split the sky. Morgan removed his simple act of putting his coat over her shoulders without saying a word, made her heart skip a beat. "I'll get the fireplace going," he said, his voice deep and smooth. She watched as he crouched down, expertly stacking the firewood and striking a match within moments. Flames flickered to life, casting a golden glow across the room. The warmth was right away, but a different reason made Kata's heart pound. The intimate setting, the isolation, the way the firelight danced against Morgan's sculpted features, it was all too much. Morgan sat back against the couch, staring at her with an illegible expression. "Kata, sit down." There was no point in standing around. Freezing, she hesitated for only a moment before walking over and lowering herself onto the couch beside him. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. "I had no idea that our business trip would become an adventure in survival." "Finally," she said, nervously laughing, trying to break Morgan's intensity, smirked, his lips curving into a rare, genuine smile. "Neither did I, but maybe," Katya felt the slight drop in his voice, which wasn't a bad thing. Weight of his gaze on her, she turned her head to meet his eyes, only to find an intensity she wasn't prepared for. His usual cold, calculating stare was gone, replaced with something else. "Something raw and primal," she whispered, uncertain of what she was about to say. But he reached out and touched her cheek before she could say anything. "Burning despite its lightness, which you can smell incredible," he murmured in a husky voice filled with something she couldn't quite identify. And her breath caught the air in between them, crackled like the storm outside, charged with something powerful, unquestionable. "Kata." He prayed when he called her name. Like a confession, and before she could second-guess herself, before logic could step in, she closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a slow, heated kiss, one that sent shivers down her spine and set her entire body aflame. Morgan groaned, his control slipping as he deepened the kiss, pulling her onto his lap with ease. His hands explored her curves, memorizing every inch of her. She melted against him, completely surrendering to the moment. To him, the storm outside faded into the background. The only thing that existed was the heat between them, the undeniable pull that had been too long simmering below the surface. When they finally pulled away, breathless foreheads pressed together, Morgan cued her face gently. I don't know what's going on," he said, acknowledging that his voice was rough with desire, with something deeper. "But I know one thing: I don't want this night to end." Katata took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her chest, and then she said, "Let it be," and the crackling fire sealed their fate. Cast flickering golden hues across the rustic wooden cabin, illuminating the raw hunger in and stormy blue eyes as he gazed at Kataya still perched on his lap, her delicate fingers resting against his broad chest. The air between them was the storm outside, raged with fury, thick with tension, and a wildfire of emotions that neither of them could contain any longer. The cabin walls were being battered by the howling wind and torrential rain, but the Morgan's pulse thumped as he trailed, and the storm inside them was much more dangerous. His fingers along the curve of Kat's jaw, tilting her face up to meet his intense gaze. Her amber eyes, wide and searching, reflected both hesitation and longing, and he could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest as her breath grew uneven. Katya, his voice was low and husky, filled with a desire that he could no longer fulfill. Suppressing his emotions and concentrating solely on business, he had spent years constructing barriers around his heart. Success, power. But in this moment, none of that mattered. All that existed was her intoxicating scent, her flawless skin, the way her lips parted slightly as if waiting for him to claim them again. Katata took a big inhale, her thoughts racing as she struggled against the storm of emotions. This was her boss, the man she had long admired from afar, the man who could command boardrooms with a single glance, strike fear into the hearts of his competitors with nothing but his icy calm. But here he was, staring at her as if she were the only thing in the world he needed. The weight of his strong hands on her waist burned through the Morgan. This is she. The fabric of her blouse sending chills down her spine began, but her words vanished as he leaned in and warmed her with his breath. He murmured, "Lips tell me to stop," as he slightly tightened his grip on her hips. "Tell me, and I'll do so." However, she did not and could not, because despite all the logic screaming at her, despite the warning bells ringing in her, she wanted him with a shaky breath, but her mind and body betrayed her. Reached up, threading her fingers through his dark hair, feeling the silky strands between her fingertips. That was all the confirmation Morgan needed. A deep growl rumbled in his chest as he kissed her with his lips. No longer gentle, but his hands moved around her back in a desperate attempt to eat, pressing her closer as if trying to transform their bodies into a single unit. Kata whimpered against his overwhelmed mouth. By the force of it all, his touch was like fire that ignited something in her she had never felt before, the way his lips moved against hers, the way his hands. It appeared as though he was memorizing her and worshiping her as he traced her body's curves. Morgan was losing control, something that had never happened before. He was always calculated, always in command, but with Crea he was unraveling the scent of jasmine, while vanilla clung to her skin, driving him mad. He effortlessly lifted her, carrying her across the small space of the cabin and lowering her onto the soft, worn-out mattress in the corner. He hovered over her, his eyes dark with. He whispered, "Something primal, something possessive. You're beautiful." Katata bit her as his fingers traced down her arm, eliciting goosebumps. Lips burning on her cheeks as he looked at her. No one had ever looked at her like Morgan did, as if she were unique. "Treasure something precious, Morgan." She breathed her voice. He leaned down, trembling with anticipation, and ran his lips along her collarbone with his fingers, exploring her body with deliberate, slow movements. Each touch produced waves of pleasure coursing through her, making her arch into him, craving more. The storm outside mirrored the storm within them. Lightning illuminated the cabin in sharp flashes, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Time lost all meaning. Morgan was watching as they got sucked into each other, lost in a night of unbridled passion. Relentless, worshiping every inch of her, his kisses leaving trails of fire across her skin. Kaya had never felt anything, never imagined that desire could be so completely consuming like this before. Shisur gave him an overwhelming treatment, letting go of all inhibitions and doubts. The storm continued for hours, eventually subsided, but inside the cabin their fire remained. Burned Katata lay curled against Morgan's chest, his strong arms wrapped around her protectively. The rhythmic sound of his heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, grounding her in the reality of what had just happened. She should have felt regret, should have worried about what this meant for them, but all she felt was peace. A deep Morgan's fingers traced laziness with an unshakable sense of belonging. Circles on her bare shoulder, his other hand tangled in her hair. He had never held a woman in this way before, and never wanted to be close to anyone after the. His enthusiasm had diminished, but with Kata, everything was different, which he did not want. To let go, a heavy silence filled the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that wrapped around them like a cocoon. Finally, Kata found her voice. "What happens now?" she whispered. Her Morgan exhaled as his unfocused fingers traced the hard planes of his chest, slowly tightening his hold on her. Now he paused as if choosing his words carefully, but then he murmured, "Now you're," with a shaky sense of certainty mine. Her breath caught and she lifted her head to look at him. "Morgan, we can't." But he silenced her with a deep, lingering kiss. "I don't care about the rules, Katya. I don't care about I don't know what is expected of me or what other people think. All I know is that I want you, and I do not intend to halt." Katya's pounding heart as his words sank in. This wasn't just a moment of weakness for him. This wasn't just passion. This was something more, something deeper. "You don't know what you're saying," she murmured, but he shook his head. "I know exactly what I'm saying. You think I can go back to how things were after this, after you?" He cued her face, his stroking her swollen lips with my thumb. I want more, Kaya, in nights like this. More of you, and I don't care what I have to do to make that happen. Her eyes. She looked at him to see if he seemed hesitant, but all she found was raw, unfiltered honesty. Morgan, her voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it. He heard everything, and he knew in that moment that he would never let her go. The storm had brought them together, but now it was up to them to decide what came next. And as Morgan pulled her close once more, pressing his lips to hers with all the promise of a man who had made his decision, Kata realized that there was no. After turning around, the morning poured in with a golden hue through the cracks of the wooden cabin, casting soft patterns across the worn-out mattress where Morgan and Katya lay, tangled in each other's warmth. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp freshness in the mountain air. But inside the cabin, an entirely different kind of storm remained, a storm of feelings that neither of them had anticipated, and Kaya sparked it first. Her lashes fluttering open as she felt the steady rise and fall of Morgan's chest beneath her fingers instinctively tightening against his cheek as her heart clenched at the reality of their closeness. Bare skin before she quickly pulled away. Realizing what she had done, heat rushed to her cheeks as the memories of the night flooded her mind. His touch, his kisses, the way he had unraveled her with nothing more than a whisper of her name. It had been unlike anything she had ever experienced before, and yet the weight of it all pressed down on her. Now she turned slightly and pretending to slip away quietly, but before she could move, a strong arm tightened around her waist, pulling her back against his body. Going somewhere, Morgan's voice was husky with sleep, sending shivers down her spine. She hesitated, her lips parting, but no words came out. She couldn't figure out how to explain the flurry of ideas going through her head. Crossed a line with her boss, a man who had always been unattainable. And yet here she was, lying beside him as if she belonged. She finally managed to say, "There, I just thought I should freshen up." Softer than she intended. Morgan loosened his grip slightly but didn't let go. Instead, he shifted, standing on one elbow to examine her face. Intense blue eyes looking into hers, "Regrets?" he asked. But Kata could not understand his tone. Before she even realized what she was doing, she choked heavily and shook her head. She admitted, barely above a whisper, "But this changes everything, Morgan." His expression darkened slightly, his jaw tightening as if he already knew the battle going on inside her mind. "Yes," he agreed, brushing with his fingers. Stray strand of hair from her face. "And I don't intend to pretend it didn't happen." His words sent a fresh wave of emotions crashing over her. There was no hesitation in his voice, no regret, only certainty. He wanted more of her, more of what had happened last night, and deep down she knew she wanted it too. But reality was never that simple. They were stranded in this cabin, away from the everything in the real world seemed to be made more intense by the isolation. What would happen when they resumed their regular lives? Simply returned to acting as boss and secretary, while pretending this evening of passion had never happened. She wasn't sure she could. "Morgan, this isn't just about us," she said carefully, trying to find the right words. "You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I'm your secretary. People will talk. And what if it's just the situation making us feel this way?" Morgan's eyes darkened with something dangerous, something possessive. "You think this is just because of the situation?" His voice was low, almost challenging. He reached out, tilting her chin so that she was forced to meet his gaze. "Katya, I've wanted you for a long time." Her breath hitched, her eyes widening, what she whispered. He exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening against her skin. "You think I never noticed you, that I never thought about you?" He shook his head, his expression almost frustrated. "I kept my distance because I thought it was the right thing to do. I told myself I couldn't mix business with personal desires. But last night when I had you in my arms, when I tasted you," Ikata's heart pounded in her chest as she realized I could never return. Her erratic pulse was something she had never anticipated from Morgan, who had always so cold, so untouchable, and yet here he was, confessing that he'd been fighting this for more time than she even realized, because her emotions made her throat tight. Threatening to overwhelm her, "Morgan, I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. He studied her for a moment before leaning in, brushing his lips against her forehead with a tenderness that broke her heart, and he whispered, "Don't say anything. Just stay for a second." She gave herself permission to believe that maybe they could exist in this bubble a little longer. She melted into him, allowing herself to bask in the warmth of his. Allow yourself to temporarily forget about the outside world. But fate had other plans. Plans a sharp sound shattered the peaceful morning, the distinct crackle of a radio. Kaya jolted upright, her heart hammering in her chest as Morgan cursed. He quickly, under his breath, got out of bed and grabbed his torn shirt. Moved closer to the sound. The emergency radio they had discovered the previous night but had assumed was dead due to the cabin was filled with storm static before a crackling voice came through. "Interference. If anyone can hear this, the storm has passed. Helicopters are being sent for search and rescue." Over Kata's breath caught in her throat. The realization that they were being saved and would return hit her like a tidal wave. And suddenly the warmth of Morgan's arms around her felt like a fleeting dream, slipping through her fingers before she could even grasp it. Morgan turned to her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, they held a silent promise. "We'll talk about this when we're back," he said firmly. "This isn't over, Ka." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the spark that had grown between them. But her worries about what would happen if everything went wrong grew. Changed as soon as they left this mountain. What would happen if reality shattered the fragile bond they had established here? But before she could voice her fears, Morgan closed the distance between them, cupping her face and pressing a searing kiss to her lips, as if branding his. He whispered, "Promise into her very soul that you are mine." Her mouth, his breath hot and possessive, "And I don't care what it takes, I'm not letting you go." Her heart clenched in response to his words, and a combination of fear and longing twisted inside of her. Because despite all her uncertainties, one truth remained: she didn't want him to let go. As the fading sound of helicopter blades became increasingly audible, indicating the end of, Katya was aware, despite their isolation, that whatever lay beyond this mountain, nothing was ever going to be chaos or clarity, for one thing. Kata felt a chill down her spine once more, as the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the crisp mountain air. Spine not because of the cold, but because of the reality it carried with it. Their time in isolation was over. What had felt like a hidden world, where only she and Morgan existed, a world where their passion blazed unrestrained, and she stood about to leave. Frozen at the cabin's threshold, watching as the rescue team descended with efficiency, their voices crackling over radios, their movements mechanical as Morgan stood beside her as they prepared to return them. His steady. She could not bear to look at him despite the heat on her skin. Afraid that the moment their feet touched the civilized ground again, everything that had happened between them would turn into nothing more than a memory. Would Morgan still look at her the same way? Would he still crave her the way he had in that cabin? Or was she just a moment of weakness for him, a fleeting indulgence that had no place in his real world? As the rescue team ushered them toward the helicopter, Morgan placed a firm hand on the small of her back, guiding her forward, but the possessiveness in his touch didn't fade. If anything, it deepened when she hesitated at the edge of the helicopter. Morgan turned to her, overwhelmed by the rapid shift in their circumstances, gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made the world around them disappear. "This doesn't end here," he said, his voice low and unwavering, drowning out the noise of the helicopter. "I meant every word, Katya. I'm not letting you go." Her breath caught her fingers, clenching into fists, as she fought the emotions storming inside her. But before she could respond, before she could decide whether to cling to his words or protect herself from heartbreak, she was ushered inside, died, and the helicopter lifted off the ground. The flight back to Kaya remained focused on the mountains while civilization was painfully silent. Below, watching as the place that had changed everything for her disappeared beneath them, Morgan sat beside her, his arm resting on the back of her seat. His presence overwhelming, but he didn't speak. Maybe he sensed her turmoil. Maybe he was absorbed in his own thoughts. But the silence between them felt fragile, as though one bad move could break it. When they finally landed, the chaos of reality shattered everything. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, Journalists shouting questions about the billionaire CEO's unexpected disappearance. Security pushed through the crowd, escorting them toward waiting cars. And for the first time since that night, Katya felt like an outsider in Morgan's world again. He was back to being the powerful CEO, untouchable, unreachable, and she was just. His secretary's heart sank deeply as she observed him interact with his staff and issue orders using his usual sharpness. And the whispered man who had held her so tenderly, promises into her skin, was now composed, unreadable, and it terrified her. Was this how it ended? She was being foolish. What had she expected, that in front of the entire world he would embrace her and declare that she was his, that their passion at night would somehow change everything? Reality didn't work that way. As they reached the sleek black car waiting for them, Morgan turned to her, his fingers wrapping around her wrist before she could step away. "Get in," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Katya hesitated, glancing at I saw another car, the one that was supposed to take her home, waiting for her. "Should get in," he repeated, softer this time, but just as firm. His eyes burned with something fierce, something possessive. "We're not done, Katya." Her pulse raced as she slid into the car, and the moment the door closed behind them, the tension in the air became suffocating. Morgan didn't waste a day. As soon as he turned to face her, his fingers tipped her chin up, forcing her to make a choice. But to meet his gaze, "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice a dangerous whisper. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. Of what happens next? Yes, she was, because she had no idea where this was going, and she was terrified of wanting something that might never be real. "Morgan," she forced herself to say, "we were alone on that mountain." Trying to be rational despite the fire in his eyes, things were different there. "But this is your world, and I don't fit in it." His jaw clenched and his grip tightened, making you believe that what transpired between us was simply due to the location. Or his voice was edged with frustration. "You think I don't know the difference between something real and desire?" she barely whispered. Able to say the words out loud, his eyes darkened, his hand moving to cradle the side of her face. "You are real to me, Katya, more real than anything I've had in my life." Her heart slammed into her ribs, catching her breath as his lips hovered just over hers, making fun of her and torturing her. "But I need to know something," he continued in a low, dangerous voice. "Do you want this?" Me, the answer burned inside her, screaming to be spoken, but fear held her back. If she said yes, she would risk everything by entering a world to which she was not a part. But if she said no, she would be walking away from the only thing that had ever made her feel truly alive. "Say it, Katya," he insisted, his lips rubbing against hers with each word. A war raged inside her, but in the end, there was only one truth. One true, undeniable, and indisputable fact. She breathed and spoke. Morgan kissed her, trembling. "I want you," as soon as the words left her lips. Her with a desperation that made her dizzy, his hands tangled in her hair, his body pressing against hers as if he wanted to close every gap in their relationship. And the kiss was possessive, hungry, as if he needed to remind her that she belonged to him, and maybe she did by the time they arrived at his penthouse. Katya's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, her body still tingling from his touch. But as she stepped inside, the reality of what she had just agreed to hit her full force. She was no longer Morgan's secretary. Rather, she was something else, deeper, and there was no turning back. Morgan stood behind her, his hands. "You're mine now, Katya," he murmured, his lips brushing against the ear's shell while resting on her shoulders. Voice that sent a chill down her spine. "And I won't let you go." Her breath hitched, her pulse wilded. She had taken the leap. Now there was no telling Katya where they would land before he turned her around. Katya barely had time to process the weight of Morgan's words. Around and captured her lips in another searing kiss. His hands were firm on her waist, pulling her against him with a desperate kind of hunger, as if the hours the mountain had only made his desire for her stronger since they had left, and perhaps they had. Because for her, every second away from him had felt like torment, a slow, agonizing unraveling of something she wasn't ready to. Morgan's windows were illuminated from floor to ceiling by the city lights. The penthouse is a stark contrast to the unspoiled wilderness of the mountains, where they had first surrendered to each other, yet despite the change in setting, the Katya's consuming and unrelenting fire remained between them. They grasped at his suit's fabric with trembling fingers, as if he were the only thing holding her together. Anchored his breath with a possessive dominance as his lips moved against hers. His body was hot and insistent, pressing against hers to the point where she had to kneel. Weak, he murmured. You don't know what you've done to me, Katya. Lips, his voice rough with emotion. I can't stop thinking about you. Her heart pounded as he lifted her. I don't want to stop. Effortlessly leading her to the luxurious velvet couch in the middle of the grand living room, he lowered her onto it, his body covering hers as his lips trailed down her throat, his breath fanning over her skin, igniting flames wherever he touched her. Her fingers were entangled in his hair, and her body caught fire. Morgan groaned in response, arching into him as a soft moan escaped from her lips. She wanted to give it to him, but her grip tightened as if he needed more of her, more of this, and more of everything. Made Morgan feel at ease, and her voice was barely audible. However, it was enough to compel him to pause, and he fixed his dark eyes on hers as he searched. Questioning, "Are you afraid?" He asked, his voice a deep, velvety rasp that sent shivers down her spine. Was possibly she, but not him. Of him she was afraid of. How deeply he affected her, how much she wanted him, how quickly he had become the center of her world. No, she said, tracing with her fingers. Sharp angles of his jaw, memorizing the way he looked at her as if she was the only thing that mattered. But I just don't want this to be a dream. And his expression changed, as he cued her face with both hands, forcing her to realize that what he was looking at wasn't he declared, I don't want just one night with Dream Katya, his voice rough with emotion. I want every night. I want forever. Her heart slamming, her breath hitched. Against her ribs forever, it was too much. It was everything. And yet the moment when she said it, she realized she also wanted it. And not just now. But always, but how could they have forever? He was a billionaire, CEO, powerful and untouchable, and she was just his secretary, his obsession, his weakness, Morgan, she thought. But he stopped her with a slow, deep kiss. Filled with a promise she wasn't ready to believe, he murmured, Don't run from me. I won't let you knock on the door when I feel her lips against mine. Morgan growled in rage, breaking the tense silence between them. Forehead resting against hers as he took a deep breath before pulling away. Stay here, he ordered, his eyes still dark from starvation. Katya gave him a watching nod as he straightened his suit and walked toward the door with the same authoritative presence that had made he was so influential in the business world that she struggled to breathe, trying to remain calm. She was going through a storm, but it was impossible because everything was happening too quickly and intensely, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Morgan spoke to whoever was on the other side of the door, his tone sharp. Kaya was annoyed and couldn't understand what was being said, but she could hear the tension in his voice, and the conversation ended as quickly as it began. And he was his back expression hard to read? Who was it? She softly inquired. Her stomach twisting with unease, Morgan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Someone who doesn't matter, but something in his eyes told her otherwise. Under the surface, something sinister and possessive was brewing in front of their eyes. Dangerous Kata, he said suddenly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Move, she joined me, and her breath caught something I didn't want. You staying in that tiny apartment anymore? I want you here with me. His words sent a thrill through her, but they also scared her because they were moving too quickly, right? But when she looked into his eyes, all she saw was certainty and a hunger that wouldn't go away. Be denied, he needed her more than just wanted her, and she was beginning to realize she needed him too. Say yes, he demanded, his fingers brushing against her cheek. Said, you'll be mine, and her heart screamed at her to slow down, but her soul already belonged to him. Yes, she whispered, sealing her fate with one simple word. Morgan's expression darkened with satisfaction, his lips curling into, he murmured with a triumphant smile, pulling her into his arms once. More because I'm never letting you go, Katya. And as his lips claimed hers again, she knew there was no turning back. She had stepped into the fire, and there was no escaping it now. But maybe she didn't want to. But Katya barely noticed how the city shone beneath them like a sea of stars. Noticed as she stood by the window of Morgan's penthouse, her fingers pressed lightly against the cool glass. Her heart was still racing from the force of his words and his claim of her, as if there was no doubt in his mind. That she belonged to him, move in with me, the words echoed in her mind over, and she had said yes again, eliciting a storm of emotions within. Agreed, and now there was no turning back. A part of her was still overwhelmed, still struggling to believe that this was real. That Morgan, the powerful and untouchable CEO, wanted her in his life not only as his secretary, but as something more than a passing desire. More as something permanent. She turned her gaze drawn to the man who had turned her world upside down. Morgan stood by the bar pouring himself a drink. His suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong tanned forearms. He looked like a king surveying his empire, his presence commanding his expression unreadable, but when he lifted his gaze to hers, the fire in his eyes was undeniable. That you were quiet, he said, his voice smooth but with a hint of something deeper, something possessive. Are you having second thoughts? Katya swallowed her fingers, curling into fists at her sides. No, she admitted softly. I don't know how to process all of this, Morgan said, set his glass down and crossed the room in a few powerful strides. Stopping just inches from her, his scent surrounded her, intoxicating and familiar, making her knees weak. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her skin. Then don't think, he murmured, his voice low and hypnotic. Just feel. And then his lips were on hers, claiming, demanding, as if he needed to remind her that there was no room for doubt between them. The moment his mouth moved against hers, every hesitation, every uncertainty melted away. She surrendered to him completely, her arms wrapping around his neck as he lifted her effortlessly, carrying her through the vast penthouse without breaking the kiss when he laid her down on the massive bed. His body covering hers, she knew there was no going back. This was her reality now, this passion, this hunger, this man. He was hers and she was his. Morgan's hands explored her body with slow, deliberate movements, memorizing every inch of her branding, her as his. His lips trailed down her throat across her collarbone, setting her skin on fire. You have no idea what you do to me, Katya, he murmured against her. You have no idea how much I want you. But his voice is thick with desire. Her body arched into him, begging for more, and she gasped as he intensified his touch. The raw possessiveness in his touch and the intensity of his need were almost too much, but not enough at the same time. He worshipped her, cherished her, as if she was the most precious thing in his world. And maybe she was meaningless as time passed, as they gave in to their passion. Their breaths mixing in the stillness of the night as their bodies became entangled in the sheets when Morgan pulled her away. Against his chest, his sluggish fingers running down her spine. And now you're mine, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. And I'm never letting you go. Katya shut her eyes and let his words sink into her heart. She was aware that the world would face difficulties. Outside, no one would be able to comprehend what they had. But right now, nothing mattered because they were here. She had discovered something she had been looking for all along. Love in Morgan's arms. Passion and a home in the most unexpected place as sleep began to pull. She heard Morgan's voice again, this time firm and soft. Tomorrow we start our life together. And as she drifted into dreams, Tia awoke, filled with his love, voice, and touch. She knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. To the warmth that was all around her, a steady beat in her ear, the strong, comforting heartbeat of Morgan. His arm was draped over her waist, his body curved protectively around hers, as he wouldn't let her go even when she was asleep. So she blinked her eyes to get used to through the sheer curtains of the penthouse bedroom. Soft morning light, the events of the past night came rushing back to her. His words, his touch, the way he had completely consumed her, leaving no room for skepticism, but only raw, unquestionable passion that she had never experienced before. She cherished, desired, and most dangerously, loved. The Morgan was shaken to her core by the thought of, could it be love? Her as more than just his secretary, more than a fleeting obsession, or was she allowing herself to get lost in a fantasy that could shatter at any moment? A low groan came from behind her, Morgan, before she could lose herself in her thoughts, shifted, tightening his hold on her, his lips brushing against her bare shoulder in a sleepy caress. You're awake. Even though his voice was muffled and deep from sleep, it already had a possessive edge, like a man who claimed something and was unwilling to part with it. Why do I feel like you're Katata, overthinking? Bit her lip in hesitation before turning in his embrace to meet his dark gaze. Eyes still heavy with sleep searched hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I just... She hesitated, unsure of how to voice the whirlwind of emotions inside her. This is happening so quickly. Morgan, I was just your secretary last week. Now I'm awake in your bed, up next to you, moving in with you. I just don't want to be something he can only use for a short time. Expression hardened instantly, a storm brewing behind his eyes as he sat up, pulling her with him. His grip on her chin was firm but gentle as he forced. He repeated his dangerous tone, causing her to temporarily look at him, as if the very idea was offensive. Do you really think I would go this far if I saw you as something temporary? Katya swallowed, under the sheer dominance of his voice, which made her heart race. I don't know, she admitted softly. You're a powerful man, Morgan. You could have anyone, I just don't understand why it's... He took a deep breath through his fingers, and I could feel a muscle in his jaw tighten. Tightening slightly, because you've always been the one, he said in a voice that roared. Kata. Something she wasn't sure she'd ever heard from him before vulnerability that night on the mountain didn't change anything. It only made me realize what was already there. You've been making me crazy for months, but I was too stubborn to admit it. So I'll never let you go now that I have you. Her heart pounding against her ribs as his words engulfed her like a promise, a potentially poisonous one that she wasn't sure she could keep. And yet doubt still lingered in the corners of her mind. But what about your Morgan people's lives, and the world in which they live differ from mine? We'll talk. They'll judge him. His face became dark, fingers slipping under her chin to tilt her face up. Let them talk, he said simply. I don't care what others think. You are mine, Ka, and I will let them decide. Won't let anything take you away from me. Before she could argue, his lips crashed against hers, silencing every insecurity, every fear, every doubt. He kissed her, as if he was proving something, as if he was branding his promise into her soul, and she couldn't fight it. She didn't want to, because when Morgan kissed her, nothing, when he turned his eyes away, no other thing in the world existed. Burned with unwavering determination. I want you in my bed, not just in my bed, Kaya, he murmured. Life in every way, and I will do whatever it takes to make you believe that Kata's... His words settled deeply in her heart. And perhaps this wasn't just an affair. Maybe this wasn't just an impulsive decision. Maybe just maybe B. Morgan meant every word, and if he truly saw her as more than just a passing flame, then maybe it was time she stopped fighting it. A small smile tugged at her lips as she drew a strong line through his jaw. Okay, she whispered. Morgan arched a brow. Okay, she nodded, her fingers tangling in his hair as she drew him nearer. Okay, she said more strongly. Time, I'll stop overthinking. I'll trust you. A slow, satisfied smirk curved his lips before he claimed her mouth again, sealing her words with another possessive kiss. Good, he murmured against her lips, because now that I have you, I'm never letting go. And as he pulled her beneath him once more, showing her with every touch, every kiss, every whispered promise, just how deeply he meant it, Kaya knew that she had fallen into something far greater than she had ever imagined. And now that there was no way to avoid it, Katya felt a shift in her life. From the moment she entered Morgan's world, moving in with him was more than just sharing a space. Stepping into the life of a man whose past had made him seem so out of touch. Reach had observed him from behind the scenes for years, booking his flights, organizing his meetings, making sure his schedule ran without a hitch. However, that thought occurred because she was now more than just his secretary. She did not tremble out of fear, but rather out of the overwhelming rush of emotions she had never experienced before. She had woken up in his arms, tangled in silk sheets that smelled of him, her body still aching from the passion of the night before. Every part of her had been claimed, worshipped, devoured by Morgan. And yet the way he had held her, after the way his lips had pressed against her forehead, as he murmured promises she never thought she would hear it, helped her realize that this wasn't just lust. Another one of Morgan's conquests. It was something deeper, something dangerous, something that could consume her whole. She wrapped the bedsheet around herself as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The city below was waking up, but inside this penis time felt like it had slowed, like she was standing on the edge of something irreversible. She didn't hear Morgan approach until she felt the heat of his body behind her, the solid press of his chest against her back, his hands sliding around her waist, pulling her against him. "You're up early," he murmured against her shoulder, his lips brushing against her bare skin, sending a shiver down her spine. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted softly, tilting her head as his lips continued their slow, torturous exploration of her neck. Morgan smirked against her skin. "I'll take the blame for that." His voice was thick with satisfaction, his hands gripping her hips possessively. "Did I wear you out, Katya?" Her sweetheart felt her cheeks burn, but she couldn't deny that he had. And yet, despite the exhaustion, her body still craved. Him still longed for the way he made her feel like she was the only thing in his world. Maybe a little, she confessed, feeling his arms tighten around her. Morgan chuckled a deep rich, he whispered, turning her into his, a sound that resonated throughout her body. Arms so he could see her face, his dark eyes locked onto hers, filled with something intense that made her breath catch, as I have no intention of stopping. His lips slammed against hers shortly before she could respond, stealing her breath. Stealing every coherent thought from her mind, he kissed her as if he was making another claim, another promise, his hands roaming her body, reminding her exactly who she belonged to. The sheet she had. She was wrapped around herself when it fell out of her grasp and pooled at their feet, but Morgan was lifting her anyway, her effortlessly carrying her back to the bed, as if he couldn't stand to be apart from her for even a second. Hours passed in a blur of tangled limbs, whispered moans and soft gasps, as Morgan took his time worshiping her all over again. He wasn't just making love to her. By binding her to him, he was ensuring that she was aware that there was no escape, turning back, and she didn't want to. She wanted to drown in him because of the way he touched her and said her name as if it were the only one that had ever happened to anyone else. Mattered when they finally collapsed into one another's arms, where Katya drew sloppy circles on his exposed chest. Her head resting against his heart. "Morgan," she murmured, hesitating for a momentarily, before she turned to see what was going on. Morgan stood on one elbow, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Now," he said, his voice laced with certainty. "We live together." She gulped down her pounding heart. "In your company, reputation, and the media." Morgan put her to silence with a kiss, moving his lips against hers with a gentleness that made her chest tighten. "I told you before, I don't care what anyone thinks," he whispered. "The only thing that matters is you." Kaya felt her throat tighten because she had been doubting for so long. She wasn't sure if this was real, but from the way Morgan looked at her and held her, she knew he wouldn't let go. And neither was she as she curled against him, listening to the steady beat. She realized from the bottom of her heart that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just existing, she was living, and with Morgan by her side, she knew that this was only the beginning. Katya had always believed that love was something slow and delicate, something that took years to grow into something important, but not with Morgan. Slow, it was a storm, a fire, and a force that completely consumed her every moment. Spent in his arms only made her feelings more intense, tying her to him in some way. The way he looked at her, touched her, and claimed her made that seem unbreakable. The most precious thing in his world left no room for doubt, but even as she drowned in his passion, as her body ached with the remnants of the nights they spent, Tangled together, a lingering fear still clung to the edges of her mind. Could something this intense, this all-consuming truly last? The city lights sparkled beneath them as Kata stood on the penthouse balcony, wrapped in nothing but Morgan's shirt, the cool night air brushed against. She exhaled, her mind racing with, her skin sending a shiver down her spine. Behind her, she could hear the faint sounds of Morgan moving inside the penthouse, which she couldn't quite identify. Clink of glasses, the deep timbre of his voice as he spoke to someone on the phone. He was always busy, always in control, was the powerful CEO everyone knew him to be all along. But even when he was with her, he was different. He was softer, more possessive, more unrestrained in his desire. She closed her eyes, replaying the way he'd made love to her just hours ago, how he had whispered her name like a prayer, how his lips had traced every inch of her body as if memorizing her, how his hands had gripped her hips, holding her in place as he lost himself in her. Even now, her body still hummed from the intensity of it, from the way he had completely unraveled her. The sound of footsteps approaching pulled her from her thoughts for a split second before strong arms encircled her waist and pulled her. "You're thinking again," Morgan murmured in her ear, his lips brushing over the hard planes of his body. Her skin was radiating heat through her CCA side, and she was leaning back into him. "Embrace, I can't help it," she admitted softly. "Everything is happening so fast." Morgan turned her in his arms, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a fire that made her breath catch. "Do you regret it?" His voice was low, dangerous, as if the thought of her regretting them was something he couldn't bear. Kata's heart clenched at the vulnerability hidden beneath his question. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "No," she whispered. "I don't regret anything about it." A glimmer of relief flashed across his face before his expression darkened with something else possession. "Good," he murmured before capturing her lips in a searing kiss. His grip on her tightened, his hand sliding beneath the fabric of his shirt, pressing her exposed skin against his. The kiss was insistent and full of unspoken promise that sent a shiver down her spine. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against hers, his breath heavy. "You're mine, Katya," he whispered, his voice laced with a fierce determination. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you belong to me." A lump formed in her throat at the intensity of his words. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this wasn't just another fleeting affair for him. But she was reminded that she was in danger by the lingering fear in the background. Had never belonged in his world, and Morgan pulled her away from her hesitation. "Even closer, I know what you're thinking," he murmured, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "And I won't let you doubt this doubt." Kata sucked hard, her hands clinging tightly to his wrist. Then proved. Morgan's eyes became gloomy as she whispered, barely audible. "On her waist tightening, I will." He promised, his voice filled with conviction. Starting now, before she could react, he lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her back inside the moment they crossed the threshold of the bedroom. He laid her down on the bed, his body hovering over hers. His eyes burned with something deeper than lust, something more powerful. "I will spend every night proving it to you." He vowed, his lips trailing down her neck, his hands exploring every inch of her body. "I will make you feel it, how much I need you, how much I can't live without you." And as the night stretched on, as Morgan showed her again and again just how deeply he meant his words, Katata knew there was no running from this, no running from him. She had fallen completely, irreversibly in love with Morgan, and there was no turning back. Kata lay beneath Morgan, her body still trembling from the passionate storm they had just shared, her skin burning where his hands had explored her heart, pounding with emotions that she could no longer contain. Every night spent in his arms felt like a revelation, a world where nothing else existed but the two of them, tangled in sheets, tangled in love, tangled in a passion so fierce it left her breathless. She surrendered to him completely, allowing him to claim her in ways she never imagined possible. And yet every time he touched her, every time his lips found hers, it felt like the first time all over again. She traced her fingers along his chiseled jawline, watching as he gazed at her with an intensity that made her feel weak, vulnerable yet utterly safe. His dark eyes held a promise, a silent vow that he would never let her go. And for the first time in her life, Morgan rested his elbow on Morgan's fingers and truly believed it. "You're thinking too much again," he said, brushing a hair from her flushed face. His voice was deep. Kaya exhaled, tilting her head, and husky from their love, making his thumb caress the delicate curve of her lips. Into his touch, her fingers splayed across his exposed chest, feeling his heartbeat's steady beat beneath her. "Palm, I can't help it," she admitted, her voice soft. "Everything between us. It's so intense to the point that I feel like I'm drowning in it." As he leaned down to give her a long, slow kiss, you gave Morgan a smirk that tugged at the corner of his lips, before trailing down to her neck, his tongue tracing the sensitive skin. "They're then drown in me, sweetheart," he whispered against her pulse, his voice dark with need. "Because I have no intention of letting you go." A shiver ran through her, not from fear, but from the undeniable truth. Truth in his words. He wasn't just speaking empty promises. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the way he held her, as if she was the only something that kept him grounded. Morgan shifted, pulling her over him so that she straddled his waist, his hands gripping her hips with possessive force. He looked up at her, his gaze filled with something more than just desire. "Katya," he murmured, his fingers tightening their hold. "I don't just want you for a night. I don't just want you for now." His voice was laced with something raw, something real. "I want you forever." Kata's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she cued his face, her fingers running through his thick hair. "Forever." She whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she was afraid to believe it, afraid to hope. Morgan sat up, wrapping his arms around her waist and forever pressing his forehead against hers. He proved, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was slow, deliberate, as if he was sealing his promise with every movement. "I want more nights like this, more mornings waking up beside you, more of everything that comes with loving you." Kata's eyes welled up with tears at the intensity of his voice, which she had listened to for so long, wondering if this was just a fleeting desire on his part, in the event that one day he would discover when she awoke that she was just his secretary and not the woman with whom he had a passionate night out in the mountains. But when she heard him say those words and felt his heartbeat match hers, she knew this wasn't the case. Temporary, this was real. She swallowed the lump in her throat, her hands gripping his shoulders. "Morgan," she started, but he put an end to it by kissing her again, this time more insistent and desperate, as if he needed to show her how much he cared about every word he said, as his hands once more moved through her body, igniting another fire within her, making her forget everything else but him. Their bodies moved together in a rhythm that spoke of a dance of love that was more than just physical desire, of two souls joining together through an unspoken but profoundly comprehended promise. And as they collapsed into each other once more, Kaya knew she had already given herself to him completely in every way possible. Hours later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, their bodies still glistening with the remnants of their passion, Morgan pulled her against his chest, his fingers trailing lazily along her spine. He abruptly murmured, "Marry me," his voice being confident and deep, froze her heart for a moment before resuming at a frantic pace, and she raised her head to meet his. His face was examined for any indication that he was joking, but there was none. "Was completely serious, Morgan?" She breathed, her lips parting in shock. "I mean it, Katya," he said with firmness, tipped her chin up to force her to choose. "But to look into his eyes, I don't want to waste another second without you." As Kata's heart seemed to explode from the intensity of his, "Mine be my wife." She had no idea that the man she had once only spoke these words, admired from a distance, would now be lying beside her, asking her to be his forever. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to find her voice through the overwhelming emotions choking her. "Yes," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. "Yes." Morgan, a triumphant smile spread across his face before he rolled her beneath him once more, capturing her lips in a kiss so passionate, so filled with love, that she knew she had made the right choice, because with Morgan, there was no turning back. This was their forever. When Katya said yes, Morgan felt something shift within him. It appeared as though the very foundation of his existence had been ignited irrevocably. He had always been a man with a passion that could never die, control over his business and his feelings all his life. But with KTIA, he had lost that control in the most beautiful way possible. She had taken over his heart, his mind, his every waking thought, and now she was going to be his, in the most permanent way. His wife, the mere thought, sent a rush of possessive desire through him, a desperate need to claim her, to make sure she realized that she belonged to him in every way possible from this point on. Way before Kata could even process the magnitude of what she had just agreed to, Morgan had captured her lips in a searing kiss, his hands gripping her waist with the kind of hunger that sent shivers down her spine. She melted against him, her hands tangled in his hair, as he grew closer to her with a tongue kiss. She could feel her toes curling in a slow, sensual dance against hers. Feel the heat of his body pressing into hers, the tension in his muscles as he held himself back, as if he was afraid of losing himself completely. But she didn't want him to hold back, not now, not ever. As he trailed his kisses down her jawline to the delicate, Morgan murmured against his lips and her breath hitched. "Place your hand under her ear and show me how much you want." As he flipped her over on her back, his chest let out a low growl, and his eyes met mine. As he hovered over her, his fingers traced the curves of her body with a reverence that made her look dark with desire. He rasped, his voice thick with emotion, which you have no idea caused your heart to pound. "Idea how much I need you and see how much I want you." Her lips parted, and she muttered softly, escaping as he trailed his kisses lower, slipping his hands under the thin. Every touch, every kiss, every piece of fabric covering her body was a secret promise, a vow that he would love and worship her in a way that no one else had before. And as the night went on and they kept losing themselves in each other, Kata realized that she was his in every way that mattered. When the morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a golden glow over there, Kaya moved the tangled bodies in Morgan's arms, her fingers making a pattern of nothingness. Across his bare chest, she felt sore in the best possible way, her entire being. Morgan was still asleep when the remnants of their passion began to hum. Strong arms wrapped possessively around her waist, his face buried in her hair. He looked peaceful, so unlike the powerful CEO. The world saw him as here with her. He was just a man who loved her, who wanted her in a way that defied reason. A soft smile touched her lips as she pressed a gentle kiss to his jawline, but he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her against him before she could move. He murmured, his voice still thick from sleep, "Where do you think you're going?" Still laced with that unmistakable dominance that sent a thrill down her spine. She chuckled softly, turning in his arms so she could look into his eyes. "I wasn't going anywhere," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. I still can't believe this is." As he cued her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek, real Morgan's expression softened. His gaze filled with something deeper than love, and it's forever. Her heart swelled at his words, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Forever," she echoed, her voice barely more. Before pulling her, Morgan gave her a prolonged kiss before taking a breath. As his fingers moved through her hair and onto his chest, "We ought to begin planning the wedding." He mused, a teasing glint in his eyes, "unless you want to run away with me and get married right now." Kaya laughed, her cheeks flushing at the thought, as, despite how tempting that may sound, "I believe we ought to take our time and enjoy every moment with you." He sighed dramatically. "Fine, but don't think for a second that I'm going to let you out of my sight until then." She grinned, pressing, "I wouldn't have it any other way." So I gave him a gentle kiss as they lay there, covered in each other's arms. Katya knew that no matter what happened, no matter where life took them, they would always find their way back to each other, due to the fact that what they had was more. The morning sun shone through the wide opening, more by chance than love. Glass windows illuminating the luxurious penthouse with a golden hue, but Kaya. She barely noticed the light because Morgan's arms were wrapping her whole world in their tangled bodies. She had never felt so completely loved beneath the silk sheets, skin to skin and heartbeat to heartbeat. Consumed by love, and as she traced her fingers along his toned chest, she knew that no matter what happened, this moment would remain permanently imprinted in her soul. Last night had been more than just another night of passion. It had been a promise, a vow sealed in whispers, moans. In the heat of their entwined bodies, Morgan had made love to her, with a desperation that spoke volumes, his touch worshiping her, his lips branding her, his possessive hold leaving no doubt in her mind that she belonged to him, and she had given herself to him completely, allowing herself to drown in the storm of his love, to surrender to the fire that had been burning between them since the night they had been stranded on that mountain. Morgan stirred beside her, his grip tightening around her waist as he pulled her even closer, pressing his lips against her head. He murmured, "Head, you're awake," still speaking in a deep, sleepy voice. Kaya teased, tilting her head, and smiled as she traced lazy circles on his bare skin with her fingers. Face him with his dark eyes filled with an indescribable emotion. He looked at her with something raw and intense that made her heart race. He murmured, "Could I sleep when I have you in my arms?" His tone muffled as he brushed his lips over her forehead, then her cheek, then lower, his touch setting her skin ablaze all over again. "You're too tempting." Katya felt a chill run down her spine as he called her name, at the way his hands roamed her body as if he couldn't get enough of her. She bit her lip, her fingers gripping his shoulders as he rolled her onto her back, hovering over her, with that familiar look of hunger in his eyes. "Morgan," she whispered as he trailed his lips down her neck. His fingers licked the delicate skin, and her breath caught, tangled in her hair as he gazed down at her, his expression turning serious. "Do you know what you do to me, Kaya?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you have any idea how much I need you?" Her heart clenched at his words, at the sheer intensity in his gaze. "I think I do," she murmured, reaching up to cup his face, her thumb brushing against his jawline. "Because I feel the same way." A low growl escaped his lips before he captured her mouth in a searing kiss, one that left her breathless and yearned for more, and the entire world vanished in a flash. As they got lost in each other, the outside world came back to nothing. Bodies moving together in a rhythm that spoke of something far deeper than passion. Hours later, Taya lay sprawled across Morgan's chest, her body still humming with the aftermath of their love. His fingers traced soft patterns along her back, his touch gentle yet possessive, as if he never wanted to let her go. She closed her eyes, savoring the moment, but before she could drift into sleep, his voice broke the silence. "Kata." He murmured, his fingers tilting her chin up so she could meet his gaze. "I want to take you somewhere." "Tonight?" She looked up at him with a blink of curiosity as a slow. He said with a surprise, a enigmatic smile from his lips' corners, brushing a soft kiss against her lips. "But trust me, you'll love it." Her heart fluttered at the excitement in his voice and the way he was looking at her. She agreed, unable to resist the anticipation. Building inside, Morgan blindfolded her that evening before leading her into his private vehicle, his hands never leaving hers as he guided her with gentle yet firm touches. As she tried to figure out where he was taking her, she could feel the excitement buzzing in the air and her heart pounding. When they finally got there, he took off his blindfold, and Kaya gasped at the jaw-dropping scene in front of her. Standing on the roof of an impressive glass building, they could see the city skyline stretching out before them. Lights that are reflected in the tranquil water of a private infinity pool throughout candles and white roses adorned the rooftop, and a gentle melody played in the background, and a perfectly arranged dinner table stood in the middle of it all. Tears of magic were shed by the golden glow of the candles, welled in Kat's eyes as she turned to Morgan, her heart swelling with love. "Morgan, this is beautiful," she whispered, unable to believe that he had done all of this for her. Morgan pulled her into his arms, his fingers tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Wasn't nearly as pretty as you," he said, his lips brushing against her forehead. They spent the evening wrapped in each other's presence, sharing stolen kisses between sips of wine, laughter, mingling with whispered confessions of love, and he took both of her hands in his when Morgan finally led her to the edge of the rooftop, the city lights twinkling behind them. His, and gazed intently into her eyes. I meant what I said. I don't just want you for night, Katya, he murmured, his voice filled with unwavering determination. A few nights, I don't just want you as my lover. I want you as my wife. Let out a loud gasp as he slowly got down on one knee and pulled a velvet box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a breathtaking diamond ring. Its brilliance reflected the love in his eyes, and he whispered, "Marry me, Katya. Be mine forever," in her heartfelt voice. Tears welled up on her cheeks as she looked at the man before her. The man who had once been just her boss. The man who had become her, everything she had never felt so loved, so cherished, and as she stared into his eyes, she knew there was the only response. "Yes," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with joy. "Morgan, I'll marry you." Before he slipped, a triumphant smile spreading across his lips. The ring to her finger, securing their destiny with a passionate kiss so consuming to the point of exhaustion for her as they stood there encased in others' arms, the city lights shimmering around them. Kaya knew that this was only the beginning of their forever. Kata could still feel the weight of Morgan's words settling into her heart. Each syllable left an indelible mark on her soul. She had agreed to accept his not just as a response, but also as a promise that she would be his forever, that she would give in to the man who had suddenly entered her life and transformed her world into. As she looked at the sparkling diamond ring on her finger, she noticed something extraordinary, couldn't help but smile, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. The city skyline stretched behind them, a sparkling sea of lights that reflected her feelings. But nothing could compare to the beam of light in Morgan's eyes as he pulled her into his embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if he never wanted to let go. "You have no idea how much this means," he murmured to me against her hair, his voice heavy with emotion, and she leant into his touch, pressing her palms against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I do," she whispered, "because it means just as much to me." His hands tightened on her waist, possessive yet gentle. "I don't think I'll be able to wait until the wedding to make you mine again," he admitted, his voice laced with rare desire. At his words, Kaya felt a delicious shiver run down her spine, already reacting to the intensity in his gaze. "Then don't," she whispered, tilting her face up to him, her lips mere inches away from his. That was all the invitation he needed in an instant. He didn't kiss her like a king, but his lips smashed into hers and claimed her with a hunger that ignited her entire body. He kissed her like a man who had just won his prize, like a man who had found the one and only thing that could ever satisfy his hunger. His hands roamed her body, tracing every as he backed her against the railing of his body. The curve ignited every nerve. Pressing firmly against hers, the world around them faded into nothingness. The city lights, the stars, the gentle breeze, all of it became insignificant in the face of the passion that raged between them. Morgan's fingers tangled in her hair as he deepened the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers in a slow, sensual dance that made her knees go weak. She clung to him, her nails digging into his. He growled at her lips as she gave in to the fire that was devouring them, effortlessly drawing her into his embrace, arms carrying her through the rooftop doors and into the... As he laid her down on the plush penthouse, their breaths came out in ragged gasps. Bed as he slowly undressed his shirt, his gaze never left hers, the chiseled perfection of his body. Kata's lips parted, her gaze trailing over every ridge of muscle, every inch of the man who had become her. "Everything you're staring." He teased, a smirk tugging at his lips. She smiled, reaching out to trace her fingers along his chest. "Can you blame me?" his expression. As he leaned over her, his eyes got darker with desire, and he moved his hands under her dress to push it up every inch, until it pulled around her waist. "You drive me insane, Katya," he murmured against her skin, his lips following her neck. "Collarbone lower, every single part of you." A moan escaped her lips as he worshipped her with his touch, his mouth, his body. They lost themselves in each different in the passion that existed between them, in the love that had grown so deeply that it consumed both of them. The night stretched on their bodies, entwined, their hearts beating as one, their love cemented in whispers and sigh. When the morning light streamed through the windows, Katya stirred in Morgan's arms, a satisfied ache settling in her limbs. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his, and her breath caught at the way he was looking at her. It was a look of pure adoration of a man who had found everything he had ever wanted in the woman lying beside him. "Good morning, fiancé," he murmured, pressing a soft kiss. She smiled to her forehead as she traced lazy patterns with her fingers along his chest. "Good morning, future husband," he said with a deep chuckle in his chest, tightened his arms around her, pulling her even closer. "I like the sound of that," he admitted, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "So do I," she whispered. Morgan looked up at him for a long time, changing his expression as he did so. "Serious, Kaya?" he murmured, his fingers tilting her chin up. "I want you to know something." She swallowed, her heart pounding. "What is it?" He took a deep. Before he spoke, he took a deep breath as if to center himself. "You are the only woman I've ever had. Before you, I was truly loved, and my world was cold, full of business deals and responsibilities. But you made my life more pleasant and made me feel things I never thought I was capable of feeling." His eyes searched hers, raw emotion flickering in their midst. "And I swear, for as long as I live, I will cherish you, protect you, and love you with everything I have." Tears welled in her eyes as she listened to his words, her heart swelling with a love so deep it threatened to consume her. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "And I promise you, Morgan, I will stand by your side through everything. I will love you, support you, and be yours in every way that matters." Before collapsing, Morgan sharply inhaled, as if overwhelmed by her words. The second time he kissed her, it was slow and full of promise. Devotion, with the unspoken vows that bound them together as they lay there wrapped in each other's arms. Kata knew that no matter what the future held, one thing was certain: her heart belonged to Morgan just as his belonged to her. There, in that instant, love was unstoppable, unbreakable, and eternal. She was absolutely certain that their best days were still to come. Through the curtains, the morning light shone, a golden GL low over the penthouse bedroom. Katata stirred in Morgan's arms, her heart swelling with warmth as she felt his steady breathing against her, his strong, as if he never intended to let go. His arms were around her possessively, and a smile tugged at her lips as she turned slightly and looked up at him. His attractive face, usually becoming hard by the weight of the world, looked peaceful in sleep. She reached up, brushing her fingers against his jawline, feeling the slight stubble that made him even more irresistible, as if sensing her touch. Morgan's eyes fluttered open the moment his gaze met hers. A slow smile curved his lips. "Good morning, my love," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep. Kata's heart skipped a beat at the endearment. "Good morning, my fawn." She teased, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. Morgan chuckled, rolling over to ensnare her with his weight deliciously pressing against her. "Not for long," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her lips. "Soon you'll be my—" Wife was shaken to her core by the thought that in just a few weeks they would stand before the entire world and make a commitment to love one another forever. It still felt like a dream she never wanted to wake up from, as if her thoughts were more clearly read. Morgan brushed his fingers through her hair, his eyes filled with tenderness. "Are you happy, Katya?" She gazed at him, her heart swelling with love. "I've never happier," he murmured as he kissed her deeply while softening his expression even more. "As if I were making a promise that I would spend the rest of my life ensuring that you remain that way, a wedding fit for a queen." The weeks were filled with frantic preparations for Morgan's wedding. Insisted on giving Katya the wedding of her dreams, sparing no expense. The ceremony was set in a breathtaking location, a luxurious estate overlooking the ocean, with white roses and golden lights adorning every corner. On the day, Katya stood before the mirror during the wedding, wearing a stunning gown that accentuated her curves before flaring out into a cascade of lace. The diamond necklace Morgan had gifted her rested against her cabone, a symbol of his love. Her heart pounded as she held the bouquet in her trembling